This government should go.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Stephen
Mr
Joyce.
Speaker, earth to Phil Goff. The minister's resigned. The Prime Minister has upheld the standards. Earth to Phil Goff, who's just popped a vein for the last 10 minutes trying to argue for something which has already happened. Oh dear Phil. The other thing you should never do is, if you live in glass houses, you shouldn't throw stones. You shouldn't throw stones. And I'll take a lecture from the Labor Party when they apologise for their deliberate rorting of the electoral system in 2005, where they created an extra $900,000 of electoral expenditure, and they lied like flatfish before they were able to go to an election, and then they had to pass legislation to validate that appalling, deliberate rort of the New Zealand electoral system, authorised by Helen Clark, with the toadies in her office like Grant Robertson, Mr Speaker. That's the appalling example, and Grant hates it, but it's a stain on his reputation before he even came to Parliament. It's the most appalling rubbish. I'll also take a lecture from the Labor Party. We can take a lecture from the Labor Party when they apologise for keeping Taito Philip Field in the ministry for months and months and months. This is the guy that went to jail. Phil Goff, Senior Minister in the Labor Party government. Nothing to see here, nothing to see here. I'll take a lecture from Phil Goff when he finally turns around and says they were wrong about Philip Field. And I'll also take a lecture from them. When they stop acting like immigration advisors instead of like a government. When they actually do immigration advice and their ministers pretend to be immigration consultants, and they get this dodgy deal done, and then they give the guy a citizenship ceremony in the Parliament. That's appalling. And these guys talk about transparency. They talk about ethical standards. Well, I'm sorry, Mr Speaker, that's the most appalling lapses of ethical standards that these guys have been involved with. So there you have a problem. You have the Labor Party who get up in this debate and start trying to lecture people about ethical standards. They try and lecture a Prime Minister who has accepted a minister's resignation as if he didn't, and yet they were the dodgy ones for 9 years who actually lowered the standards for ministerial conduct, which the Prime Minister has then raised again. These guys are hypocritical, and they're in glass houses throwing stones, and I strongly suggest they stop, Mr Speaker, because they look like the clowns they are. They look like the clowns they are, Mr Speaker. And that's the most... And I could do a whole roll call of ministers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 ministers during Labor's time in government that kicked the bucket one way or other. And that, Mr Speaker, is an appalling record. And this Prime Minister has upheld the highest ethical standards. And when Mr Banks knew that he was going to have to stand trial, he went straight to the Prime Minister and said, I've got to stand down. The Prime Minister accepted it. So let's compare that to Taito Philip Field. Taito Philip, how does that go with the Taito Philip Field test, Mr. I'll say Taito Philip Field all afternoon if you like, Phil, because that was the most embarrassing and pathetic example of prime ministerial accountability in New Zealand's recent history, Mr. Speaker, and that was absolutely appalling. But let's forget the Labor Party, because they're just wrapped up in all this rubbish. Let's talk about the Greens. Let's talk about the Greens, because, Mr. Speaker, it was the Greens that started this debate. And with the greatest respect to the Greens, they really do need to start thinking about where they're about, because the Green Party's sanctimoniousness on this issue is appalling. If they genuinely want to stop the convention centre in Auckland, if they genuinely don't want the jobs, then have the courage and the convictions to go out and argue for the closing of the casino industry, for the closing of the community gambling industry, for the closure of the Lotteries Commission. They don't do that because they know that would be politically unacceptable. So they allow themselves to go out there and harumph and carry on about an additional number of machines in the casino to build a big convention centre, something which, by the way, they forgot to do when Labor was in office, and they expect us to treat them as some sort of principled left-wing political party, Mr Speaker, and they don't. And worse than that, they don't like jobs. The reality is they don't like jobs. And this is what we get all the time from the Greens. They don't like jobs, Mr Speaker, and the Labor Party doesn't like jobs, Mr Speaker, and that's the problem. That's why you won't get back into government, apart from the obsession with the Beltway that Grant Robertson and Phil Goff are wrapped up in. The reality is they won't get back into office next year because they're not about jobs and growth for New Zealanders. They're about making up stories. They're about making up stories about the government and opposing jobs at every opportunity. And what will be remembered about the bill that is behind this discussion today, Mr Speaker, what will be remembered about it is that it will create 1,000 jobs in construction. It will create 800 jobs once it's constructed. It will be an asset for Auckland. It will be an asset for New Zealand. It'll be like the Hobbit movies. It'll be like the RMA changes which have helped to speed up development. It'll be like oil and gas exploration, the biggest summer in New Zealand for oil and gas exploration and all the jobs that goes with that. It'll be like all these other things that the Labor Party and the Greens have opposed, increased irrigation. There we have the pro-tem candidate for the Labor Party in Napier running around today saying he's against irrigation, against oil and gas, so he's out, he won't be standing, and if he is, he won't be winning the Napier electorate definitely at the next election. Because actually New Zealanders are interested in jobs, they're interested in growth, they're not interested in Grant Robertson, we have actually established that, they're not interested in Phil Goff, they're not interested in the Greens running around the place setting up taxpayers' money to do a stunt at the Aotea Square in Auckland with cardboard boxes. They are interested in a government that builds a brighter future for this country by ensuring opportunities for companies to invest and grow jobs and to succeed, and for New Zealanders to succeed there and bring up their families here. That's what New Zealanders are interested in, and they're also interested in a Prime Minister who has the highest ethical standards and who delivers on that on an ongoing basis. And the Labor Party may have it, but their constant desire to pull the government down into the mud that they live in is not working this time. It's not worked any time, and New Zealanders know this government is working for them. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Members, this debate has concluded. Call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Telecommunications Interception